Brother Bernard MOUKONG of Cameroon. Power evangelism against wizards in the village of KIBOUM. The one who gives this testimony is called Bernard MOUKONG, a former student of the Biblical Institute of Ndiki, a very balanced man, both intellectually and spiritually. Bernard MOUKONG spent his childhood in the village of EVANGELISM 3 near the village of KIBOUM, which will be discussed in this article. Here is his testimony. It was during an evangelization campaign by German pastor Reinhard Bonk, while I was passing through Douala, that I converted to Jesus Christ. Back in my village, I joined the budding cell of a revival church which asked me to be its leader a year later, in 1983. As soon as this responsibility was entrusted to me, I had at heart to evangelize the surrounding villages. After a fast of several days and long prayers, our cell moved to the village of KIBOUM to preach the gospel there. If we had chosen this village, it is because for the past 5 years, no Christian leader, pastor, priest, or evangelist dared to cross it for fear of occult manifestations which resulted in sudden deaths, cases of madness or death, poisoning. Our first action was to ask the village chief if he accepted that the inhabitants who wished to be delivered from the demonic powers. After his agreement, we obeyed the order that the Lord had given me during a moment of prayer that I had to prepare this campaign. It involved chopping down a tree, under which wizards, marabouts, and healers gathered to cast a spell on their victims. In the natural cavities of the tree and in the ground, the participants of these satanic meetings had buried objects composed of organic elements coming from the body of each participant. They were strands of hair, pieces of fingernails and blood, as well as the remains of a sacrificed animal. These objects were like the witness to a pact, and if any of the attendees disclosed what had been said during a meeting, they died exactly 9 days after speaking, a violent or unexplained death. The first day of evangelism consisted of cutting down the tree. It is our evangelization cell that had to do this work, none of the inhabitants of the village having dared to approach the tree. During the cut, which lasted 6 hours, we sang hymns, such as the well-known one with the title "The Walls of Jericho Have Fallen." We also prayed tirelessly. The Lord had given us a course plan. After the tree was felled, we spent the rest of the day and evening worshipping the Lord and giving our testimony to the people of the village. We also warned the village that we would be preaching the gospel each day to come from 3 p.m. until the evening. The children of this village were particularly struck by very numerous epileptic seizures. There again, the Lord had specified to me that the parents of these children knew the origin of this evil, and that they had to confess their fault if they wanted to be delivered from it. 8 fathers of children with epilepsy agreed to recognize, confess, and abandon the practices that had led these children to be epileptic. When a sorcerer, a healer, or a marabout is consulted by a client to obtain a favor, this client must offer a life to the marabout so that the latter receives the power that will meet the request of the consultant. In KIBOUM, when a father wanted to obtain a very large harvest, or some other advantage, he had to offer the life of one of his children in exchange for this service. As soon as the pact was concluded, the child would die suddenly for so-called unknown reasons, or he would become insane or epileptic. To seal the pact, a so-called mystical plant that looks like an onion was planted by the father and the healer behind the family house. At my request, the 8 fathers referred to agreed to bring their mystical plants, and we burned them immediately. At the time of the deliverance prayer that I addressed to God in the presence of the whole village, all the epileptic children fell screaming. The children of the 8 fathers who confessed their sin and burnt their plants were more restless and screaming louder than the others. However, after a while calm returned and I was able to retreat into seclusion with the children and families who had broken their alliance with the occult forces. It was then that during a new prayer, the true deliverance took place. It was 1984, over 10 years ago, that none of the children with epilepsy that were delivered relapsed. Their deliverance was total and final. The parents of the delivered children have converted to Jesus Christ, and a revival church now exists in this village. On the other hand, those who did not renounce these practices, and there are many of them, were not delivered. This testimony would undoubtedly be less convincing, so surprisingly it seems, if a new element had not come to confirm it. Since last February, Dr. Pierre Anderzejewski, the operating doctor in charge of the Endiki dispensary and the branch's doctors who depend on it, a very committed Christian with his wife Marilena coming from the Church of Christ in France, observed without being able to explain that the very many cases of epilepsy among the children of the village of KIBOUM seemed to have an occult origin such as root cause. Bernard MOUKONG's testimony has just confirmed this to him. Alliances with the devil exist, not only in Africa, but also in Europe where, under the guise of science or new experiments, more and more people are falling into this trap. The amalgamation of hair, nails, and human blood is no worse than the crystal ball and all other forms of occult powers. It is an open door to the devil, who then has the right of citizenship in the lives of his victims. Hair, blood, stone, or wood do not change in nature, but they are all perches on which demons can rest before coming to live in the people who made them. The African pharmacopoeia we are talking about so much today is rarely effective by itself in its practice. It is always associated with a spiritual dimension which is hidden from the faces of the European researchers who have come to study it. Certain plants cure because of the active ingredients which they contain, certainly, but how many others have only one effect. But in the midst of this darkness, how strong and reassuring is the light of Jesus Christ, who triumphed over all evil powers, and who shares this victory today, even in a village as dark as KIBOUM, to all those who repented and believed on him. Source: ointmentduseigneur.over-blog.com